Hello, I'm Graham Steele, CEO and founder of Cryptosense, and today I'm going to talk about 4 ways to compromise a public key certificate. So why do I want to talk about that? Well, if you've seen our video on the Mimecast certificate compromise that we posted back in January, you'll know that there was an incident recently where this big email security software provider announced that one of their certificates had been compromised. A certificate that is used in that case for authenticating Mimecast to Microsoft 365 Exchange servers. So these are servers containing a whole bunch of mail, and Mimecast need to prove their Mimecast in order for you to be happy to send them your mails for disaster recovery reasons or for security scanning reasons or whatever it is. So this story has had a bit of an update since then. So on March the 16th, Mimecast published an update where they confirmed what we suspected, we mentioned in the video at the time, which is that this certificate compromise was part of the operation carried out using the Solarwinds compromise. So using the backdoor that Solarwinds provided, attackers were then able to go ahead and do this certificate compromise, and they made it very clear that the emails that they have belonging to their customers hosted on their servers don't appear to be accessed. So I guess it's very important for them for various disclosure regulatory reasons to make that very clear. So nobody had read the emails there. But what we don't know at this point is whether that certificate was used to read mails that were on the Mimecast customers' Exchange 365 services. But there are some clues. So around the same time, another security company called Malwarebytes revealed that some of their emails had been read, most likely as part of this same SolarWinds-based attack operation, and that the access came through a dormant email security product that they had installed. Well, we don't know which software product that was, which email security product, but it gives us an idea basically of what's going on. So there may have been ways that this certificate could be used to get hold of mail. So that's why I want to talk about certificate compromise, because we're seeing this in this attack pattern as part of an advanced threat actor's way of getting hold of sensitive data. So when we talk about certificate compromise, there's something we have to be very clear about. It isn't enough to compromise a certificate to just get hold of it. It's not like a secret that I need to see. Once I have that certificate, then I'm okay and I can do some bad things. Typically, that certificate, the public key certificate, is a relatively non-sensitive piece of information. So if you look in your web browser, for example, you can pull up a list of 140 public key certificates that you have in there that belong to the root CAs. And of course, it's great that you should have those. What you don't have is the private key that goes with the public key that's in the certificate. And to compromise a certificate, I need to get hold of the private key as well. Why is that? Well, this is how authentication works. If I'm trying to prove that I'm Mimecast to somebody who has set up an authorization for Mimecast on their email server in Microsoft's infrastructure in Microsoft 365, then what's going to happen is essentially a TLS protocol exchange, so the normal exchange that you do when you connect to a sensitive service on the internet in your web browser, for example. And during that exchange, the Mimecast server is going to present this certificate and say, look, hey, look, I'm Mimecast. And the receiving server is going to have to verify that this certificate really does I haven't just been shown the certificate, but actually this is coming from Mimecast, so it's coming from the person who has the private key that corresponds to that. And in part of the exchange, the Mimecast private key is used to sign something, and that can be verified by the counterparty who's got the public key certificate in their hand, so they can check that that really was a valid signature. So now they know they're talking to a counterparty who has the Mimecast private key, so it must be Mimecast, so we can go ahead and grant them access, at least to the next level of authentication, to go ahead and do some stuff. So these advanced actors managed to get into the Mimecast infrastructure and get hold of not just the public key certificate, but the private key that's behind it that they need to do their attack. So how could they have done that? So there's 4 ways I'm going to tell you that could have happened, and that's based on real things that we've seen go wrong in the past. So the first way is just that the private key wasn't being stored correctly. So this is an example of what we saw, for example, in the RSA Secure ID compromise way back in 2010, 2011. Where attackers were able to get hold of the seed value that's used in Secure ID single one-time password logon devices. There, the private credential, there is a seed value for symmetric key, but it's the same kind of idea. The private key credential just wasn't being stored properly. And there's various ways you can get storage wrong with private keys, particularly in software. You'll know if you subscribe to our channel, which you should, that we've done a whole series about the vulnerabilities in software key stores, particularly in legacy key stores from the 1990s that predate cryptography export restrictions. These are really widely used in all sorts of places in default setups for all kinds of frameworks. And if you create a key using that, the private key ends up getting stored in a very insecure way. So it could just have been plain insecure software storage of the private key that meant that as soon as the attacker had access to that file system, wherever it was, they were able to break the weak encryption and get hold of it. Second thing is perhaps the key was stored as it should be stored in best practice for sensitive private keys, which is inside a piece of dedicated hardware, so a hardware security module or HSM, but the attackers managed to get the key out of the HSM all the same. So how can they do that with an expensive piece of hardware that is really set up to be secure and certified by FIPS and so on? Well, we have a whole bunch of examples of HSM attacks here on the channel, but ways in the past have included doing things like breaking the entire HSM by its update mechanism. So Ledger showed how to do that to an HSM at Black Hat in 2019. In 2011, in the DigiNotar attacks, the exact attack mechanism never came to light, but essentially what happened was that the attackers persuaded the HSM to make a signature for them, even though the DigiNotar team didn't think that the HSM was in the right mode to do that at the time, where it turned out that it could be made to do that. And there are other ways that this can happen as well. You can misconfigure your HSM to make too much functionality available so that a smart attacker can forge themselves a signature even without actually asking for a signature using that key. So for example, if the same private key can do PKCS1 1.5 decryption as well as signature, and I can find access to that function by some indirect route, then by using a panning oracle attack, I can eventually forge myself a signature. And there's various other ways that you can get the configuration of an HSM wrong to make that possible. So that's another possibility. Third possibility is that the attackers managed to persuade Mimecast somewhere in their CA infrastructure to sign for them a certificate that they could use. So this kind of spoofing has happened in the past as well. So some certification authorities, the people who sign challenges of keys that you want to use to prove that you're really the owner of a certain domain on the internet, in the past sometimes less scrupulous or less rigorous CAs have been compromised by kind of social engineering type attacks where people have claimed to own a certain domain and have managed to get around the normal verification process that's supposed to stop that happening, and then they can get hold of a certificate for a domain that isn't theirs, which they can then use to go ahead and make an attack. Well, here we're talking about an internal CA, but we know that internal procedures inside enterprises for getting hold of certificates are under a lot of pressure right now to accelerate and go faster because enterprise infrastructure is changing so much faster with the way that we build services these days. So it could be that the attackers found an attack vector there, a way to circumvent the normal processes and get hold of a certificate themselves for a private key that they actually generated for themselves. And a fourth and final way is the really cool way, I say, of breaking a certificate, which is to do it mathematically. That is to look at the public key and figure out what the private key is. So of course you're not supposed to be able to do this. This is the fundamental way that asymmetric cryptography or public key cryptography works is if I give you the public key, that gives you no clue as to the real value of the private key. But sometimes this does happen. So a recent time this happened in 2017 was the emergence of the Infineon-related key generation bug. So this was a bug which meant that there were a whole bunch of RSA keys out there in the wild, which with a bit of compute power, you can actually break mathematically because they were designed with a certain pattern all the time, which had enough information about what the value of the private key was to apply an old attack method from 96 by Coppersmith to then go ahead and figure out what the private key is. So it's not out of the question with these state level attackers that for particular variants of key generation with perhaps some particular bugs in that we don't know about yet, there are some mathematical capabilities to break a certain number of private keys. But that would be the kind of capability you would be very reluctant about revealing, that's for sure. But it gives a taste of what will happen in the future when there are large quantum computers around, and perhaps only certain people will have them at the beginning and we won't know about them, because that's exactly the capability that a large quantum computer will have to just take the public key and figure out what the private key is behind it without ever touching the HSM or ever seeing the value of the private key. So that's 4 possible ways that a PKI certificate can be compromised. Here at Cryptosense, we make software which can help you prevent all of those. So give you at-scale visibility and observability on all your use of cryptography, including in HSMs, including where you're storing certificates in software, including looking for weak enrollment protocols to CAs, and looking for keys that have known bugs in their generation. So get in touch with us, use the details in the video details if you want to do that. Otherwise, subscribe to the Cryptosense channel and we'll keep you up to date with all the latest news on applied crypto and how crypto is being used well and broken in the real world. And I'll see you again soon here on the channel.